900,000 years ago, the Earth was a place both familiar and alien. Great beasts roamed the forests and plains, saber-toothed cats, massive elephants with towering tusks, and giant hyenas that prowled in the night. The air was cooler, harsher, and unpredictable. Vast ice sheets advanced and retreated, reshaping entire continents. But somewhere among the shadows of this prehistoric world lived our distant ancestors. They were not yet fully modern humans. They were small bands of hunter-gatherers, primitive in their tools, fragile in their numbers, but already carrying within them the spark of survival that would one day give rise to us. And then something happened, something so devastating, so overwhelming, that it nearly erased our species from the face of the earth. Scientists call it a genetic bottleneck. Evidence suggests that around 900,000 years ago, the global population of early humans collapsed, shrinking by as much as 99%. Imagine it. A world of thousands suddenly reduced to just a few hundred, perhaps only 1,000 individuals. The razor-thin line between survival and extinction was never closer. But what caused this? Why did nearly all of humanity vanish, leaving behind only a small group of survivors from whom every living person today is descended? To understand this story, we must journey back in time. We must step into a world of fire and ice, predators and prey, scarcity and fear. A world where survival was never guaranteed. This is not just a story of disaster, it is the story of rebirth. For if those few survivors had perished, if their fragile line had broken, there would be no us, no history, no civilization, no human story to tell. This is the story of the great human collapse of 900,000 years ago. The puzzle of our origins. For decades, scientists studied human fossils, tools, and migration patterns, but the picture of our distant past remained blurry. Then, modern genetics opened a new window into history. By examining the DNA of modern humans, researchers uncovered something astonishing, evidence of a near-extinction event in our lineage. Our ancestors' genetic diversity was shockingly small, far smaller than would be expected for a thriving population spread across continents. The DNA told a grim tale that almost all humans alive today trace their lineage back to a tiny, isolated population that survived against impossible odds. This wasn't a slow decline. It was sudden, sharp, and nearly final. Something wiped out the overwhelming majority of our kind, something so catastrophic that it drove humanity to the brink. But the most haunting question is, what was it? Some theories point to massive climate change, a cycle of ice ages and droughts that stripped the land of food and water. Others suggest volcanic winters, triggered by colossal eruptions that darkened the skies and poisoned the air. Still others wonder if disease, predators, or even competition with other human species played a role. What we know is this. Around 900,000 years ago, humanity faced its greatest trial. Shadows of a forgotten world. Close your eyes and imagine. The year is not 2025, not 10,000 years ago, not even 100,000 years ago. The year is 900,000 BC. The world looks raw, untamed, and terrifying. Forests stretch endlessly, home to creatures now long extinct. The ground shakes with the footsteps of mammoths and ancient elephants. Rivers run wild and untamed, flooding and retreating with the seasons. And in the midst of this wilderness, tiny bands of humans. They are not us, not yet. Their faces are rougher, their skulls thicker, their bodies shorter and more muscular. They survive with simple stone tools, crude shelters, and the constant fear of predators that stalk the darkness. Every sunrise is a question. Will we live through today? And then, suddenly, the world begins to change. The rains fail, the rivers dry, the forests thin. The cold deepens, hunting becomes harder, gathering food more dangerous, and one by one, clans vanish. What was once a scattered population of tens of thousands is now reduced to hundreds. Humanity teeters on the edge of extinction. Why this story matters? Why tell this story? Because hidden within it lies the secret of our survival. Every person alive today, every culture, every language, every face, exists only because a small group of humans refused to give up. They endured hunger, fear, and suffering beyond imagination. They watched their world collapse, their people vanish, their numbers shrink to almost nothing. And yet they held on. From them we were born. From their struggle we inherited not only life but resilience, the ability to adapt, to endure, and to rise again. The great near extinction of 900,000 years ago is not just a forgotten chapter of history. It is the origin story of humanity's endurance. Around this time, the Earth was entering a long and unstable climatic cycle known as the Middle Pleistocene transition. For millions of years, ice ages had come and gone every 40,000 years, but around 900,000 years ago, the rhythm of the planet changed. Ice ages grew longer, colder, and more destructive, lasting up to 100,000 years at a time. For early humans, this meant constant upheaval. Regions that were once fertile grasslands could turn into frozen wastelands in a matter of centuries. Rivers shifted, lakes dried up, and forests retreated under the pressure of advancing ice. Imagine living in a small group of hunter-gatherers. You depend on seasonal rains, on rivers full of fish, on herds of animals that migrate through your territory. But suddenly the rains fail, the rivers shrink, the herds vanish. What do? You move, or you die. The climate was not just harsh, it was unstable, and instability is the greatest enemy of survival. The beasts of the land. The world was alive with giants. Across Africa and Eurasia, megafauna dominated the landscapes. Mammoths and mastodons, colossal relatives of today's elephants, wandered in massive herds. Their bones tell us they were prey, but to hunt them required unimaginable courage. Saber-toothed cats, with fangs as long as knives, lurked in the shadows, ambushing the weak and the careless. Giant hyenas scavenged in packs, strong enough to strip a carcass in minutes, clever enough to stalk humans as prey. Gigantic ground sloths, ancient bison, and wild horses grazed the plains, providing food for predators and occasionally for humans brave enough to hunt them. But these creatures were not the only threat. They were competitors. For every animal humans hunted, lions, leopards, and wolves hunted too. Every carcass was a prize, and early humans were often the last in line, arriving late to steal scraps left by stronger predators. In this brutal world, humans were not kings. They were survivors. Early humans, our distant ancestors. So who were these humans teetering on the edge of extinction? They were not Homo sapiens. We had not yet evolved. Instead, the world was home to earlier species of humans, likely Homo erectus in Asia and Africa, and perhaps their cousins, early forms of Homo heidelbergensis in parts of Eurasia. These humans walked upright. They used tools. They hunted and gathered. They shared food, cared for their young, and perhaps even communicated with simple language. But they were vulnerable. Their tools were simple stone hand axes and scrapers, chipped from flint and basalt. Their shelters were little more than caves, rock overhangs, or fragile huts of branches and leaves. Fire was rare, precious, and not always under their control. Life expectancy was short, perhaps 30 years, often less. Injury, disease, or hunger could end a life at any moment. And yet, they persevered. generation after generation. The rhythm of survival. For these early humans, survival was a daily struggle. Morning. The group awoke, often huddled together for warmth. Fires, if they had them, were tended carefully. Scouts went out to track animals or search for edible plants. Daytime, small hunting parties pursued game, while others foraged for roots, fruits, and nuts. Children learned by watching, by mimicking, by failing and trying again. Evening, the group gathered to share food, tell stories through gestures and sounds, and keep watch for predators. Night was the most dangerous time, when eyes glowed in the darkness and death could strike suddenly. And yet, despite these struggles, humans endured. They spread across Africa, into Europe, and as far as Asia. They adapted to deserts, forests, and coasts. Their population, though small, was scattered across continents. But this fragile balance was about to shatter. A world on the brink. As the climate shifted more violently, the ecosystems that sustained life began to collapse. Glaciers advanced, swallowing valleys. Rainfall patterns broke apart, turning green lands into deserts. Animal populations dwindled. For humans, the consequences were catastrophic. Fewer animals meant less meat. Fewer plants meant hunger. And hunger bred desperation. Conflict between groups, riskier hunts, greater exposure to danger. The stage was set for disaster. Soon, something, whether climate, catastrophe, or a deadly combination, would push humanity to the edge. The population would plummet, falling not by half, not by 3/4, but by nearly 99%. A world once scattered with small human tribes would be emptied, leaving only a handful of survivors clinging to life. Something happened around 900,000 years ago that nearly erased humanity from existence. The evidence is clear. Genetic studies show that early human populations, once scattered across Africa and beyond, collapsed almost overnight, reduced to a fraction of their size. Thanks for watching. See you in next part.